And welcome back to another episode. This time I'll be covering the Awakened Collector Adept. Same equipment, same weapon, same modules as before, but some important things to cover of note. What I'm actually going to be doing is specializing in the use of the damage over time effects from the Awakened Collector. An important thing to keep in mind here is that Dark Sphere's damage over time is given as a damage over time and then a duration rather than a damage per second and duration, which means if we look here at the rank 4, we can see it does a little over 100 damage per second, 537 divided by 5. If we were to take this one, which sounds like it would increase the damage and duration, or which sounds like it would increase the overall damage of the spell, it actually decreases the damage per second at the expense of, or due to the increase in duration. So I'm not going to be picking those up on purpose. Additionally, I'll be grabbing the damage reduction from Seeker Swarm because it basically just becomes passive mitigation, and it will give me biotic detonations in case I need them. Dark Channel is a pretty rank and file staple damage per second skill, nothing special there. Picking power damage and capacity. Specifically of note, the power damage bonus goes up to 65% for the Awakened Collector, which is a good bit higher than most. And finally, Ancient Warrior. This talent I actually kind of mischose. I thought Ascension mode would be a bit more important for my playstyle, but in practice I just don't like dealing with it, and the fragility that it adds isn't helpful. I would have rather grabbed the extra health and shield, but as you can see with 938 barrier while not having it, still pretty durable. So let's try and get into a match real quick. And see what we come up against. Nothing, just an empty lobby. So that means I get to control everything. Random. The N7 Destroyer is one I'm looking forward to messing around with too. So the first thing, of course, is to get the Seeker Swarm up and running. It's basically passive mitigation, which it doesn't really have any drawbacks other than a cooldown to activate it at the beginning, but you can play around that pretty easily, especially if you're casting it between waves. And we're up against Reapers, which is fine. Some of the Reaper troops have a ton of health, which will affect, obviously, how long it takes for us to kill things. But it's not a big deal. Overall, I feel this playstyle isn't quite as good as the Singularity Warp from the Human Adept, but it's by no means a bad playstyle at all. So you'll notice that the Dark Sphere itself has a very long travel time. It also persists wherever it lands and will continually refresh the damage over time effect, which is why we were avoiding the things that decreased its damage per second, because we can keep 100% uptime on the damage over time effect by dropping it onto the ground near people, which is also why I've positioned myself at the top of the stairs here. Being able to throw it downward means I can keep it active forever and really do a ton of damage to anything and everything that happens to be standing there. The Ravagers are particularly vulnerable to it because they don't really move once they get in range. They just kind of hang out. And with me being able to continually light them up and immediately destroy any swarmers that get spawned, it's pretty effective. I've seen some people struggle with the Ravagers, but this build does not. You'll also notice that, generally speaking, I only have one ability that's actually activating the cooldown for the character. Throwing out the dark channels in particular is what I'm referencing. The dark sphere only generates cooldown when you detonate it, which means that, in all honesty, you could get away with this build having very heavy weapons as well, mainly because you don't need to use your abilities that often for them to give their full effect. I've instead opted to use the Talon with the power damage bonus because I'm pretty okay with being a one-trick pony, but honestly taking something like the Widow or something like that gives the ability to punch through cover would be extremely vulnerable or extremely valuable against the Guardians. But the build as is doesn't work out too poorly, and you can still kind of get around some of the vulnerabilities of the build. I'm going to keep harping on it until I finally get it, but having the Lancer would be amazing with this build. However, you by no means need to be perfectly min-maxed to do silver. It's not really that difficult. It's mostly just a matter of paying attention, keeping alert, and addressing the enemies correctly using the tools that you have, as well as trying to make sure that you have tools for every kind of enemy. Alright, cool, so the brute did come over here. So the brutes love to charge at people. This guy helped out a ton with that flamethrower. But brutes love to charge at their enemies. So if you time it right, you can actually charge past them while they're still winding up, and you'll harmlessly evade them, which is easier with the collector than it is with most classes, because another thing I forgot to mention, the collector's dodges cover an extraordinary amount of range compared to everybody else. If you compare the distance that I travel to any of the other classes, you can see very quickly that I'm moving much farther, much faster. Hey, Banshees. But there is an example of passing through the brute. And brute taken down with relatively no trouble. Banshees can be a bit more annoying because of their power immunity, but nothing is unmanageable, and I believe the sphere's application of its dot applies even through the power immunity, but I'm not positive. Either way, she's vulnerable now though. So we light her off with the dots, put some bullets in her, and the flamethrower from this Vorcha doing some serious work. Use some extra ammo. And you can see Ravagers have started to enter the field finally. Both of my dots will also prime for biotic detonations, which I don't tend to use very much on the collector, but I'm sure my teammates who do use them would appreciate it. The Seeker Swarms themselves actually do trigger biotic explosions too, so I certainly can fire them off myself. I just tend not to. I like to just let the dots tick. There is... Alright. So... this group's actually doing rather well. We might stick around after this game and play a couple more with them, see if they stick together. And you can see how long the cooldown is reactivating the Seeker Swarm. And this is with a pretty high cooldown refresh rate build. I think the Seeker Swarm and the Dark Swarm each get up to like 15 or 20 seconds with an unmodified build. Which is hellaciously inconvenient, but having the extra skill recharge helps out more than a little bit. Ah, I fucked that up good and proper. So now I just have to wait for the sphere to disappear and I can show you dealing with a Ravager. Don't know if I mentioned it already, the radius of the dark sphere for its application is actually a good bit larger than its visual range, or than it appears to be. And you saw with that Ravager how easily it went down. This build is extremely good at dealing with Ravagers. And the melee of the Awakened Collector is really potent too. They don't have a light melee. They only have their heavy melee and Ascension mode. And Ascension mode pretty substantially increases the amount of damage you take. So I try not to use it. And I thought I got far enough away, but I should have dodged. Now we've got another Ravager. Throws out some Swarmers, but they immediately get toasted by the Dark Swarm. Or the Dark Sphere, rather. I got wrecked. I had to use the, I forget what they're called. I'm gonna call them Band-Aids. Fuck you, game. The interface does not handle multiple player games very well sometimes. I got stuck on the wall there for a second because there was a teammate like in the same space as me. And that happened because I tried to revive somebody who was already being revived. So it took cover on the wall. I'm hoping a lot of this stuff is resolved in Andromeda. I believe they said there will be multiplayer, and I'm not sure where they're going to go with it, but I'm hoping it's not entirely dissimilar from this. Though, another little thing, I'm not sure if anybody's aware, cover your ears for a second if you're wanting to play blind, but they're getting rid of the class system, which means, of course, that the player won't be limited in single player at all to what abilities you pick. You just get whatever you want. I imagine the multiplayer will still have a class system, but they haven't released any real details. And it's missile launcher time. I'm done dealing with this shit. I accidentally detonated the dark sphere. I'm gonna detonate it on purpose real quick though, just because. Alright, all targets down. Yeah, stop! Can you believe the nerves of some people shooting me? Fucking stop it, man. Just bleed to death, it's fine. Just bleed to death. You don't need to be alive. And now it's time for evac, which happens over here. Alright, cool, everybody's hanging out. Way too many people on this side. So I'm gonna go over to the other side. Started ticking on him. The brutes, I think, have more armor than the banshees, although the banshees also have their barrier and the power immunity, which should make the banshees tougher overall, but a half armor brute has more health than a half armor banshee. And for the most part, I consider brutes to be more dangerous than banshees anyway. Banshees are really only particularly bad when they get their sync kill on you. When they're just kind of standing around like idiots, they're not that dangerous. Whereas brutes do that kind of shit. This blue bubble here is from the Asari Justicar that we've got with us. It decreases the damage you take for being in there. Although of course that doesn't save you from sync kills. The only thing that saves you from those are being a Juggernaut. But that was a pretty good game, so I will go ahead and upload that. It's a pretty decent playstyle, but by far not the only one. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed.